My story took place when I was 13 years old. It might seem a little old for trick-or-treating for some, but I know I really enjoyed it. I actually feared aging and growing a bit because I knew there was gonna be a time in which I could not do this anymore. Fortunately, when I was a teenager, I was still a bit small for my age, so I could still get away with it. And no, I don't just like to trick-or-treat for the candy. It's the whole atmosphere of trick-or-treating that I love. I enjoy the whole neighborhood overflowing with children, dressed in nice costumes. I like the houses that go all out in their Halloween decorations, and I like seeing the sheer creativity of everyone, while also experiencing an atmosphere completely based on horror. The one bad thing about being 13 and going trick-or-treating, though, was that all of my friends who were around my age didn't feel the same way as I did about it. This meant I usually had to go all alone. It didn't really bug me too much though, as at least I could go at my own pace, walking around the neighborhood as I liked. Eventually though, I noticed I didn't seem to be the only older kid that was trick-or-treating. There was one kid who had to be a few years older than me. I based this on the fact that he was just pretty huge. I can't say how tall he was exactly, but he was pretty damn tall, and he was dressed as some sort of mummy. His costume was actually really good. He didn't go for the cheap toilet paper mummy look used by some kids. He used some really nice cloth. All in all, it was actually a very cool looking costume. Early in the night, I was admiring his costume. I guess perhaps I was watching him too closely though, because at one point he walked by me and said, "What the hell are you looking at?" He also bumped into me as he walked by. I sorta messed up when he did that, and I told him to fuck off. This seemed to make the guy very angry because he started following me after that. He didn't do anything at first, but I could tell that he had to be pretty pissed off. Whenever I would hit a house, he would hit it right after me. This kept up for quite a while. I tried to up my speed and lose him several times, but each time he eventually caught back up with me. I couldn't really understand why he was doing this. He didn't try to hurt me or anything. I actually doubted he would try that with the amount of people that were around. I just thought maybe he was trying to make my experience unpleasant by scaring me or making me nervous. I sort of realized as we went along though, what he really seemed to be up to. He was trying to make it seem like he was simply trick-or-treating, when in reality he was only trying to keep up with me because he knew the crowd would eventually disperse. When it did, he would know where I was. I've had problems with bullies before, but this one in particular really scared me. I tried my best to lose him in the crowd like I mentioned, but it was not easy. He just kept on catching up with me somehow. Shortly after I'd leave a house, even if I ran away and hid, I'd make it to another one and just see him coming along his way. As the crowd of kids got thinner and thinner, I finally realized I might have to forgo my trick-or-treating and just go home altogether. It would be much safer to go home while the trick-or-treating was still in full force. Even though I didn't have anywhere near as much of a haul as I would have liked, I set out on my way home. He tried to follow me still through the throngs of children, but that really didn't bother me too much. I knew that once I was safe in my home, it really wouldn't matter. There was very little he'd be able to do to me at that point. I thought I'd lost him by the time I got home. I couldn't see him anywhere. My house was completely dark because my parents were not home. They had gone out to a Halloween party. Still, there were enough children and adults out in the streets that I was not too concerned about being in danger. I made my way into my house, and I thought I was fine. I spent the rest of the night watching scary movies, eating popcorn and candy. My parents weren't going to be back until late that night, but that was okay with me. I was sure the guy was gone now. I had spent several hours all alone and feeling safe inside my house. When at about 11 o'clock, I heard my doorbell ring. I thought this was pretty odd, so I got up and walked to the door. Looking out of the window in the door, I didn't see anyone on the porch. For some reason, my mind went back to that mummy. I really didn't worry about him too much though. I was in my house after all. I wasn't worried he could do anything to me. I figured I'd open the door only slightly to see if maybe there was a small trick-or-treater who was out really late or something. Maybe they came by my house as they were leaving. I unlocked the door and had just begun to open it up. The moment I did though, it happened so fast I could barely process it. A bandaged hand grabbed the door and flung it open with such force it pulled me down to the ground. I was grabbed after I was laying on the porch. I was picked up and pushed against the wall of my house. It was the mummy. He punched me several times in the stomach, then grabbed me around the neck. I started crying and panicking, thinking this son of a bitch was going to try and kill me. I really began to lose my breath. I flailed around, trying to do anything to get this guy off me. My head began getting dizzy as tears fell down from my eyes. I really thought I was going to die. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I heard someone yell out from behind us. Shortly afterwards, I fell to the ground. My neighbor had heard the commotion and come running out of their house. I was gasping for air, so I didn't notice it, but the mummy ran off after. My neighbor came to check on me. Rather than go after the mummy, they made sure I was okay. I'm pretty thankful for that. Fortunately, I was not seriously hurt. I had some minor injuries, but physically I was able to recover pretty fast. Mentally was a completely different story though. I don't know if I ever saw the mummy again. That's the problem. I had no idea who he was, but whenever I saw someone who was tall like him, inwardly I would begin to panic. That took me a very, very long time to come to terms with. Some people I just can't understand why they do the things they do. During Halloween, I like to be one of those really cool houses that all the trick-or-treaters like to go to. I buy the really good candy, and I buy lots of it too. I think the kids always look forward to coming to my house because they know they're gonna get the quality stuff. One Halloween, however, I had a really bad experience. Well, I guess it was slightly after Halloween since it technically occurred after midnight. I'd had a pretty good night up to that point. A lot of kids had come by that night, and I still had a lot of candy left over after the trick-or-treating died down. I concentrated on just having a night watching some Halloween specials on TV. I live in a pretty good neighborhood, and we're not known for having pranksters or anything like that. There were no houses getting egged as far as I knew, and there were no flaming piles of dog shit around either. Around 1 a.m., I was playing video games when I heard a knock at the door. I thought it was a bit odd, but I put down my controller and went to check who was there. I opened it up slightly because there was no peephole, and no one was there. I didn't give it too much thought in the moment. I just assumed it was some kids doing a ding-dong ditch thing. About 10 minutes later, though, I heard another knock on the door. I was a little bit irritated this time because I was now under the impression that kids were playing pranks on me, and I really didn't have the patience for such a thing. I got up angrily and marched over to the door. Then I opened it again. There wasn't anyone at the door once again, but this time there was one of those orange jack-o'-lantern buckets just sitting on the porch. It was empty, and it was just sitting there. Looking at the door, I got a bit annoyed and kicked the bucket off my porch and onto the sidewalk. I then said loudly that I wasn't in the mood for stupid games. I would get really pissed off if anyone knocked on my door again. I went back and started playing video games again. Some time had passed now and there weren't any further knocks at my door. I was pretty happy about that for a while. However, as I was sitting there, something caught my eye just off to the side. I looked over at the window, expecting to see something there, but there seemed to be nothing. I went back to playing my game, when after a while it happened again. This time I looked over at the window as fast as I could, and I saw that same jack-o'-lantern bucket was being held up in front of the window. I was definitely caught off guard. Someone must be there holding it and making it seem as if it was looking in through the window. I got up and mentioned that whoever this was, I didn't find their game very funny. I also mentioned that if they didn't want to piss me off, they needed to stop this right now. When I said that though, the person turned the jack-o'-lantern back and forth as if they were shaking their head no. I was very not amused at this point. I told them to get the hell away from my house. Once again, the jack-o'-lantern shook its head. "All right," I said, "I've had it with this crap. I'm gonna go get my baseball bat." I turned to walk down the hallway and into my bedroom. I grabbed my aluminum baseball bat, prepared to beat the crap out of whoever was playing this joke on me. When I got back to the living room, however, the jack-o'-lantern was no longer in the window. I began to look around at the other windows to see if the person had simply changed locations around my house. As I was looking around though, I heard a crashing sound out on my front porch. I walked out the door to confront the person and immediately slipped on something. While I tried to catch my balance, I caught someone dressed in all black, holding that jack-o'-lantern bucket. They lit it on fire, and they threw that bucket at me. Just like in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, that bucket smacked me right in the face. I fell over. I got up and started covering myself with some dirt from a potted plant to put out the fire. I then looked around to see where the guy who'd thrown this at me was. He was gone already. It looked like what I'd slipped in was some sort of blood. I looked around further and saw there was a dead groundhog on my porch. Written in blood on my front door was "Trick or treat, I'll be back." I wasn't scared until that point. I just thought it was some lame joke, but anyone sick enough to kill a groundhog and write something in his blood on my door, just knowing what they'd done to it while I was playing video games, it creeped me the hell out. So, I don't really know how scary this story is to anyone else, but it is really creepy. It's not too long an incident either, but when I was 11 years old, I went trick-or-treating with my two best friends. My friend Carl's sister was 15, and she was supposed to be chaperoning us. That's the only way our parents would let us go out without them. As you might imagine for a teenager though, she did not spend much time with us. When she ran into her boyfriend and a couple of his buddies, she asked us if we'd mind trick-or-treating all by ourselves. Of course, we readily agreed. We were all too eager to get away from her. She told us to meet her back in this area in about 2 hours. We got a pretty good candy haul. It was about 20 minutes before we had to rendezvous with Carl's sister, when we came across that house. You know the one I mean. The one house in the neighborhood that everyone talks about. Now, this wasn't an abandoned house. It wasn't boarded up or anything. However, it did have a completely dead lawn and was littered with garbage. A shredded tire swing hung from a leafless tree. There was even an old beat-up ice cream truck in the yard. Now, the guy who lived there was someone that rarely anyone ever saw. We all had all sorts of stories about him. We talked about him and made up all these different theories for what was wrong with him. Some of us said he was a serial killer who got off on a technicality or something. The story, supposedly, was that he would ride around in his ice cream truck giving kids poisoned ice cream. The prevailing theory, though, was that he was a mentally incapacitated guy who still lived with his mom until the day she passed away. They said he was unable to understand what had happened and not able to take care of the property well either. He'd waited weeks after she passed away waiting for her to wake up, I guess. Supposedly, when the police found them, she had decayed pretty badly and he was still trying to feed her. Now, honestly, if you asked me, both of those stories were complete bullshit, but they were pretty popular stories in the neighborhood. Anyway, to kids our age, they were scary enough to keep us from wanting to go up to that house. There was a jack-o'-lantern out on the porch though, and it had a burning candle in it. We figured the guy must be waiting for trick-or-treaters, so the three of us kept daring each other to go up to that house. Of course, none of the three of us really wanted to go up there. We just wanted one of the others to take the dare and go alone. When none of us did, we agreed to just go up to the house together. Up on the porch was Carl, who had the balls to knock on the door. After a moment, the door opened, and the man answered it. He was dressed in a Frankenstein costume and seemed delighted to see us. He went on and on about how he never got trick-or-treaters at his house. He'd always wanted some because he really liked kids. He disappeared into his house and came back with a bowl of something. He reached in and grabbed a handful of it, then put it in Carl's bag. Before Carl could even react, he then put a handful of something into my bag as well. I looked down to see a glob of raw meat. The man had this insane look on his face. He gave our third friend another glob of mysterious meat, then said to enjoy the treats. We boys were freaked out, and we ran out of his yard until we found Carl's sister. She was pissed at us for going to that house in the first place. However, she really couldn't tell on us, because then she would get in trouble too. That mystery meat had completely destroyed our candy, but she let us do a bit more trick-or-treating now. We definitely spread that story after that experience. At least this was one story about the guy we knew was true. This happened around 2008 or so. I'm a male and was 23 at the time this all began. It was the weekend, and an old high school friend reconnected with me online. We decided to go grab a beer at a bar by his town, which was the same town I'd gone to college at. It was my turn to buy a round, so I went up to the bar of this dim, dirty dive bar and asked for a bucket of beers. As I was waiting for my drinks, a girl suddenly approached me. Let's call her Jane. Hey, do you remember me? She started acting really flirtatious. I didn't know and couldn't even think of a way I'd met her before though, so I said something like, I'm sorry, I talked to a lot of people at my job. Can you refresh my memory? She stated she'd taken some class with me and worked with me on a group project. I still had no idea who she was, however, and couldn't remember ever working on such a thing together. She knew my name and the class I was in though. I wasn't really interested in talking to her, so I politely said, well, nice to see you. I went back to my friend at the table and tried to ignore that incident. I left about an hour later and headed home. I remember I took a shower and was just getting ready to go to bed. I checked my phone before I climbed in and saw an unknown number had called me 2 different times and also texted me and left a voicemail. This was all during the short time I'd been in the shower, mind you. The text was from Jane, saying it had been great to see me, and I looked so cute, or something along those lines. Again, I didn't want to lead this girl on, so I politely responded saying it was cool to see her as well. I was obviously weirded out, because I never exchanged phone numbers at the bar. Maybe she had it on an old list if she was really in my class. When I woke up the next morning, I had over 10 texts sent to me, inviting me over for a hookup. It was just point blank telling me to come over. I laughed it off at first, and was kind of flattered. My thought was she must have drank a whole lot that night. I didn't respond as I felt it would be quite awkward. That's when the real shit began though. I worked in an office where I could not have my cell phone out while working. It's a very professional environment. On my break, I powered up my phone, only to see 19 missed calls and 100+ texts. Approximately 10 voicemails as well. I freaked out. Surely there must have been an emergency or something, but everything was from Jane. Those messages went from hellos to sexual advances to anger why I'm not answering. Sobbing, sorries, threats of violence if I didn't respond. I was beyond freaked out. I texted to see if she was okay or needed some help or something. She then responded that it was the greatest day of her life hearing back from me. I let her know I felt her messages were inappropriate and I didn't want to give her any feelings I wanted to date her. From the beginning, this whole thing was so odd to me. I began getting 40+ calls and messages. I decided it would be best to just stop responding at this point. This went on for over a week, day and night. calls, and messages. Then, one message caught my eye. She mentioned where I work, but again, I'd never told her this. There was a Wendy's a stone's throw away from my job. I got paranoid leaving work, thinking she must have been following me somehow, so I drive around the Wendy's and wait in the drive-thru for a while before going home from work. I remember sending her one last message stating that if she contacted me again, I would call the police from then on. At the time, I had to pay a monthly fee on my cell phone to have a number blocked, but I never heard from her again after. And from all the research I've done, it doesn't appear I actually had any classes with her either.